And I now give the floor to the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Señor
Mr. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has the honor of taking the floor on behalf of the group of friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations. Mr. President, the lack of a solution to the question of Palestine is at the core of the situation in the Middle East, coupled with the prevailing cycle of impunity that has only emboldened the occupying power to continue to show contempt for this body and international law. Regrettably, the ongoing genocide in the Gaza Strip, which has claimed the lives of over 46,600 innocent civilians, including women and children, a figure that may likely be 40% higher than reported according to a study recently published, and over 110,000 wounded, the overwhelming majority also civilians, has not been enough to persuade those that still today continue to provide Israel with the means to continue with its criminal policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. We demand the government of the United States of America, permanent member of the Security Council, to put aside its political calculations, for it has been this that has kept this body hostage to a paralysis that, among other things, has emboldened Israel to continue with its policies of apartheid and extermination against the Palestinian people. Mr. President, we are certainly mindful of the recent ceasefire agreement reached by the parties, and we hope that its full implementation by both parties will be an important practical step toward the long-term stabilization of the situation in occupied Palestinian territory, including in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, and that this will also create the necessary conditions for allowing unimpeded humanitarian access, consistently, safely, and to scale, to those that are in desperate need, as well as for both improving the situation in the Middle East as a region as a whole and justly resolving once and for all the question of Palestine. However, that does not absolve this body of its responsibilities, and we reiterate that this Security Council must shoulder its responsibilities, including on the basis of the relevant provisions of Chapter 7 of the Charter of the United Nations, and must also ensure that its resolutions on the question of Palestine are both fully respected and implemented. Mr. President, we avail ourselves of this opportunity to emphasize the indispensable role of UNRWA for ensuring basic services to the Palestinian refugees in the catastrophic situation in Gaza. And in this regard, we reaffirm the need to ensure the necessary political and financial support to enable UNRWA to carry out its vital operations as the backbone of the international humanitarian effort in Gaza and in accordance with its mandate in the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and in the other areas of operation in the region. Serious efforts must be urgently made to bring a halt to Israel's measures aimed at dismantling UNRWA and preventing its life-saving assistance. Similarly, we would like to also emphasize the urgent need of redoubling international efforts to effectively and immediately advance in a much-needed process of accountability for all the war crimes committed by Israel, the occupying power, against the peoples of Palestine, Lebanon, and other nations, in which all relevant mechanisms of international justice are expected to play a responsible role in order to put an end to the prevailing cycle of impunity, which has only emboldened Israel, the occupying power, to perpetuate over time its criminal policies and practices against the peoples of the region, most gravely against the Palestinian people for over 76 years since the onset of the Nakba. In this regard, we reiterate our call on the international community to take effective and concrete actions to compel Israel, the occupying power, to adhere to international law, including through the continued denunciation of the prevailing double standards and selectivity in the application of the Charter of the UN and international law, including international humanitarian law, and by warning that these double standards seriously undermine the credibility of states that insist on protecting the illegal and criminal actions of Israel and the legitimacy of multilateral institutions. In this context, we also call on the responsible members of the international community to take urgent actions and adopt in a decisive manner all necessary measures aimed at preventing the systematic attempts aimed at undermining, including by force and through resorting to illegal settlers, the viability of the state of Palestine, particularly in light of the increasing threats by Israel to annex the occupied West Bank. We recall in this context, the conclusion of the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion of 19 July 2024, which we have welcomed, and that notes that, and I quote, the sustained abuse by Israel of its position as an occupying power through annexation and assertion of permanent control over the occupied Palestinian territory and continued frustration of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination violates fundamental principles of international law and renders Israel's presence in the occupied Palestinian territory unlawful. End of quote. Mr. President, we also reiterate that establishing a just and comprehensive peace in the Middle East as a whole requires Israel's withdrawal from all occupied Arab territories, including the occupied Syrian Arab Golan, and from Lebanon, as well as implementing the relevant United Nations resolutions, most notably Resolutions 242, 338, and 497 of the Security Council, which reaffirmed that the acquisition of territory by force is inadmissible in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and the principles of international law, and that the Israeli decision to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration in the occupied Syrian Golan is null, void, and has no international legal effect. Moreover, we seize this opportunity to reiterate our serious concern at the continued attempts of Israel, the occupying power, to ignite and explode the Middle East region, as demonstrated, among other things, by its repeated gross violations of international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law, coupled with this deliberate escalation of violence and continued provocations and violations against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, stability, and security of countries in the region. We call once again on those who may have any influence to demand Israel, the occupying power, to exert restraint and desist from its aggressive policies and plans to expand the conflict and generate a spillover effect, mindful of the potential devastating consequences for the well-being of entire peoples and the peace, stability, and security of the Middle East region and beyond. Now, we welcome nonetheless the cessation of hostilities arrangement between Israel and Lebanon of the 26th of November of 2024 and call for its full implementation by both parties with the support of the United Nations Special Coordinator for Lebanon and the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, in line with their respective mandates, as well as Resolution 1701. However, we ought to express our concerns about the numerous violations of ceasefire by Israel and call for all violations of the arrangement to stop, while recalling that peacekeepers must never be the target of an attack. We also recall that, according to this arrangement, Israel should withdraw its forces in a phased manner south of the Blue Line by the 26th of January, in parallel to the deployment of Lebanese armed forces. We reaffirm in this context our strong support for the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and political independence of Lebanon, and we urge Israel to respect the agreed timeline and cease its occupation of Lebanese territories without delay. Mr. President, we conclude by stressing the need to work together decisively to ensure that we can finally put an end to the illegal Israeli occupation, that we can finally admit the State of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations, that we can finally achieve the independence of the State of Palestine with East Jerusalem, Al-Quds, Al-Sharif as its capital, that we can finally realize the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including to self-determination and freedom, and that we can finally achieve a just, comprehensive, and lasting solution to the question of Palestine in all its aspects, including for the plight of Palestinian refugees and the realization of their right to return, in accordance with international law, the relevant UN resolutions, and the Charter of the United Nations on the basis of the two-state solution. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.